Okay, welcome everybody. Um, so today I thought, I really like this lecture 182. There's a way that, to me, the guide works with meditation in a very powerful and good way, right? And so even people, I've working with people that have had quite a bit of meditation experience, even with mindfulness and stuff, and they're finding this work really useful, and I kind of, in all of my session work and all of my group work, a lot of it is sort of founded on this particular lecture, and it's a kind of classic, and it's been seen in several different ways of understanding it too. I know in the early days, like it called this meditation for three voices, and it was sort of in the beginning of learning voice dialogue, and so I think it's good with that. But I think a new twist that we are understanding, right, is really to bring it into the presence and the energetic instead of just the psychodrama kind of way of working with it. So it can be done in all of the ways, and sometimes in group, working with it, and inviting those voices to come out, but and externalize it, but we can also, work with it inside of ourselves. And so this is a kind of process of inner inquiry and a description of how to work with these states of uh, consciousness that we encounter inside of us, and really how to encourage and look for the sort of lower self, the problematic, the contracted places. So he says, this was delivered May 8th of 1970.
Before we even start, I have a question. Poor Darlene. I do this all the time. So I haven't read all the lectures. But this is the first time I actually heard the guide talk about the lower self as what does he say? The lower child, something like that.
Lower self child, yes, uh-huh.
Yeah. So maybe you can, when we get there or now, you can talk about the distinction between the lower self child and the lower self, and what exactly that is. There a distinction? Should I read something into that?
The guide, as usual, does lots of interesting ways of, changing terminology. And sometimes it can seem very confusing, but I like it myself because I think, each time he does, he's integrating and pointing to slightly different things. And I always, in the beginning of this lecture, as you read into it, it shifts kind of and really brings out sort of this compassionate holding space. But I always cringe a little bit in the beginning of this lecture when he uses that term, because I find that, people are often sort of critical and negative towards their inner children anyway, right? And so I like to focus on sort of both the divine child and the wounded child aspects of the child, right, as well. But in fact, what we are working with is the immature consciousness of a dualistic understanding, right? And as the development of consciousness is a natural process. When we come in as children, our world is even smaller in some ways, and we have a kind of very primitive, you know, need for connection, for what, getting what we need when we want it, and all of that. And so, it's a threat to us, that the world is sort of the way it is, where we don't always get everything we need, or we, have difficult experiences. And so then we're creating defenses to survive that. And the defenses, in a sense, then also trap us in sort of the beliefs and the fear-based beliefs and the negativity that we experienced, and we project it. So in a way, the way I like to look at this is, it's not that the child is bad or sinful or something like that. It's not really saying that, but its consciousness is immature, and also, like, it's within that, very young, vulnerable time frame, that we took on all of these wounded places, and then it kind of entrenched in us the defensive pseudo solution to survive. And it's kind of like the both the negativity and the defensive pseudo solution that blocks us from really feeling our higher self and connection and truth. And so the journey is sort of to uncover and work with all of this misconception that we experienced when we were little and kind of took on to survive. So I don't know. I think it'll get us clearer, and we can bring it up as we go. I think it'll resurface. So does that help?
Yes, thank you.
So he says, greetings, all my friends here. Love and blessings, help and inner strength are coming forth to sustain you and help you open up your innermost being. I hope you will continue and cultivate this process so that you will bring to life your entire being, creating wholeness in you. So, in some ways this is important, because by sitting and holding and being present to and feeling all of this and working in this dialogue way, it's like that really is the purpose, right? So what's stuck, what's dead, what's contracted inside can, be restored, creating life, bringing life in this wholeness. So he says, he wants to talk about meditation, which he's spoken of many times before, but to really understand the dynamics, the meaning, and the process of meditation. And here I'm going to say pathwork meditation, because there's many forms of meditation. But he's talking about a very specific kind here. This process of pathwork meditation and derive the maximum benefit, you must be clear about certain psychic laws. One is that there are 3 fundamental layers of the personality, and all must be involved if the meditation is to be truly effective. These 3 fundamental personality levels we may call the conscious ego level, with all conscious knowing and willing, the unconscious egotistical child level, with all its ignorance, destructiveness, and claims to omnipotence. So that kind of helps us, see some of the aspects of this lower self child. It's selfish and egotistical because it doesn't, have a connection in some ways. It's also trying to survive, right? And it's trying to survive in a way that it doesn't have the clarity, and so it's often destructive. And so there's many ways that we kind of encounter this part of us, and it's not all of the child, but there are parts of the child that are like this, and these are the parts that we're kind of wanting to bring into the light. And then the third is this super conscious universal self, with its superior wisdom, power, and love, as well as with its comprehensive understanding of events in human life. So I love this process of meditation too, because it really does help us practice listening for guidance, help us practice making that connection with this superconscious universal self, whether you want to, it comes to each of us in different ways, and we may even, understand it personally in different senses, but this greater wisdom is accessible within all of us. And what he's saying here is that the conscious ego level has to activate that. And it also has to activate and seek out and work with this unconscious egotistical child level.
Quick question. Charlie, can you scroll down again a little bit? I don't see much difference between 1 and 3. Conscious ego level with all conscious knowing and willing. Am I missing something?
Yeah, so it's one is the superconscious contains more than what the ego level knows and wills. It's the higher self.
Okay. Are these rated like lower, higher, and highest, or is it?
Well, usually the conscious ego level is what we would call the objective observer, the choice to consciously, activate our observer self, right? And kind of the the adult ego state, you know, and transactional analysis where we're not in the parental or the child consciousness, but we're just, you know, like kind of looking at reality, what's the facts, you know, and what we know. But a lot of times the conscious ego level doesn't, you know, is mystified by why it's going through this experience or what to do with this experience and how to hold it or how to transform it. And it's by then activating the higher self by seeking and praying and, you know, calling on and bringing light into the lower self that you know we receive superior awareness, right? We learn things that we didn't know before, that the conscious ego mind wasn't aware of. So there's aspects of us that is, you know, in the unconscious that is our negative side, but there are also aspects in the unconscious that is our, you know, divine side.
Okay, I guess I would put the 2, 1, and 3. Kind of my logical brain wants to put them in an order of consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think. I mean, he's talking about partly that in a way the conscious ego level is the most critical here, because it's the one that we have to ground in, and it chooses and calls forth and activates the other two. So that's our free will choice. That's the part of us that determines and makes the conscious choice. We can't always, you know, do what we're choosing, you know, but we can choose it inside, and then it's through this universal self that the power to accomplish it can come.
Got it.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
And also, you know, we have to be conscious of the egotistical child level, and so much of the time we're unconsciously suppressing, denying, hiding, pushing away. So it's our adult conscious ego that has to realize, no, I have to face, I have to feel, I have to share, I have to, you know, be consciously, you know, not hiding this, right? I want to activate it, I want to bring it out, I want to not hide it from myself or other people. Okay, and so
number 2 is actually what sets this apart from most other forms of meditation.
yes,
right? Yeah,
I would say, you know, oftentimes, right, you know, we're most meditation is sort of looking to just access the superconscious universal self in some way, and not also do the descent, also go in and contact the negativity. Now, I think in almost all forms of meditation, especially, you know, kind of the more you know, present understandings that I have, as you sit, that oftentimes this unconscious egotistical child level will surface in the meditation, right? But they also don't, and this lecture helps us learn, you know, okay, when that happens, what one does, right? You know, I think a lot of, like Adi Shanti talks about, you know, like you just know that the heart is like the center of gravity, and as you get conscious, you kind of like fall through it. You know, allow yourself to just descend and keep going towards that, you know, universal self in the heart. And so, you know, there are also different ways of working with it, right? But I think the guides is particularly useful for working with our pain bodies. And I think in some ways, if we don't have a way to do that, it limits the kind of purification work that we're trying to do as well.
That was really astute, Frank. Thanks for pointing that out. That builds some good framework. Thank you.
So in effective meditation, the conscious ego level activates both the unconscious egotistical destructive self and the superconscious superior universal self. A constant interaction among these three levels must take place, requiring a tremendous amount of alertness on the part of your conscious ego self. Now, you know, that way of phrasing it, I think, you know, feels like some of us listen to Adi Shanti and true meditation, and it feels like a little bit of sort of too much trying to be the meditator, right? So I think I would reframe that a little bit and say, you know, it requires a tremendous amount of presence, right? And simple awareness in the moment now. to notice all of these levels and you know how they're in this constant interaction. So I think part of what we're, you know, practicing a lot of times in our work together is, you know, just coming into the present and paying attention, noticing, you know, what it feels like, what is moving inside of us, all of that. And I think this builds some of that muscle that we need, because when we have a thought form that accompanies, you know, some part of our pain body, you know, self, it kind of we identify, you know, and we lose connection with both our conscious ego self and the superconscious self, and we kind of only feel like all we are is our pain body, and we don't even recognize that a lot of that pain body is a kind of vicious circle that we're creating, you know, in our own negativity, you know. And so part of the journey is to, you know, access that, see the self-responsibility, understand what's happening at that level. And we can't do that when we're moralizing in any way. And I think the guide gets into this here a little bit. And in another lecture, we were looking at that, you know, it's like, so again, that adult ego needs to be sort of like a roomy guest house, you know, we're just welcoming whatever is in us, and it's not judgmental, it's not critical, we don't judge the lower self child, we don't, you know, have some kind of contraction against what's present there with us. So the conscious ego must be completely determined to allow the unconscious egotistical self to reveal itself, to unfold, to manifest in awareness, and to express itself. So we're inviting it, we're welcoming it, you know. This is neither as difficult nor as easy as it may seem. It is difficult exclusively, my friends, because of the fear of not being as perfect, as evolved, as good, as rational, as ideal as one wants to be, and even pretends to be. So that on the surface of consciousness, the ego sometimes becomes convinced that, you know, who it has to be, who it is the idealized self-image, right? And we don't even realize, you know, that there's this other level of our being. And then this surface conviction is constantly counteracted by the unconscious knowledge deep down inside that, you know, this idealized image of ourselves is really not all of who we are, and we can't really uphold it, we can't live up to it, you know. And as a result, you know, it feels sort of fraudulent in some ways, and deep down inside we feel afraid of exposure that, you know, we can't live up to, and we can't pull off, you know, this projection of ourself. So he says it's a significant sign of self-acceptance and growth when a human being is capable of allowing the egotistical, irrational, and even outright destructive child to manifest in the inner awareness and acknowledges it in all its specific detail. And he says this is what will prevent the dangerous indirect manifestation, or where it comes out through crises, or, you know, we recreate in painful ways. Right? So I'm going to skip a little here. The conscious ego has to reach down and say, whatever is in me, whatever is hidden that I ought to know about myself, whatever negativity and destructiveness there is, should be out in the open. Now, for those of you maybe that are new to this work too, you know, when we say negativity, I mean, in part that is our resistance, our no current, you know, and in part it is, you know, the three qualities of the higher or the lower self that the guide names: pride, self-will, and fear, right? So oftentimes when we think of negativity, maybe we think strictly of, you know, hostility or aggression, or, you know, being, you know, like maybe what the love mask might think is a bad person, right? But the guide is saying that, you know, our fear, or even our, strategy of trying to take care of everybody in order to be taken care of is, a form of negativity. So we want to commit to seeing it. And that's regardless of the hurt to our vanity, right? And this is where, pride and shame are kind of a flip side of the same coin. And the pride is one of these lower self things, and so we want to find humility. We want to find our basic humanness. And that means, we're children of God. We have this higher self. We're all beautiful and unique in exactly the way that we came, and we came here to become fully ourselves. And yet, we're also flawed and imperfect, and, have parts of us that are lost and stuck and, not so loving sometimes.
Quick question.
Huh?
When it says, excuse me, should be out in the open, I'm trying to conjure up, what does that mean? Out in the open to whom, or to myself or others, or?
Mostly to ourselves, right? Because, but there's kind of a way when we try to hide it from others that we're hiding it from ourselves as well, right?
Well, I usually know it, but the shame will.
Yeah. And this is what the guide is saying. Out in the open, it's good. And again, you want to be aware of who you're sharing something like that with, right? So, yeah, if that person is going to shame you, but that's the value of having a group, having a Pathwork community, right? Because the guide says the only real cure for shame is exposure, right? So if you're still hiding it from other people, you can't heal it. It has to be shared in some kind of group setting, where you can be, like, kind of challenge this place in you that says, oh, this is so terrible, nobody can accept it, right? And what we usually discover is when we do share that, it's like, one, people see us and love us more fully, and we're more accessible to them, and two, it allows us to, accept that we're no different, because everybody has this, right? And so we can see that.
Or at least has their own stuff, right?
Huh?
They may not have the exact thing I have, but they have their own hidden.
Yeah, right. So, you might just, work to challenge that bit a little bit, Dick, and see, in what way you might risk sharing that, right? In the direction of healing that shame.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, and he says, so the first direction is, reaching into the lower self and, connecting with that. And he says, then the other direction, and this is true because otherwise we get lost and identified with the lower self, and we forget who we are, and we think that's all we are. And so he says the other direction that the conscious ego reaches for and calls, to be present is the universal higher self. And that has powers that surpass the limitation of the conscious self. These higher powers should also be called upon to expose the destructive little self so that resistance can be overcome. The ego will alone may be incapable of accomplishing this. We may be aware of this, but we don't, we can't quite, get beyond it. So, we can ask for the help of the higher self. And sometimes 12-step programs have these kinds of things, and in general, we really need to recognize this necessity, right? Because the ego by itself trying to do it alone is kind of still, like, it's missing an important part, right? It really, we can't, if we even were able to, then we would somehow feel like we were self-sufficient and we didn't need God or something, so there's a kind of humbling and a kind of place where we need to come up against, where we can't go and recognize that we need help. We need, greater powers that can be activated within us, but we have to choose them. We have to want them. And we can't make them happen by our, outer will, but in calling them forth and seeking them, one, we're clearing away what's in the way, and we're making that free will choice. And this is what allows them to, begin to activate within inside of us and help us. So anything more here?
I think the guide gives us an example of how exactly we do that, right? As we go down, because
Yeah.
In general, that's great, but I'm sure there must be some specific help.
Yeah. And it's some of what, we do in the process meditations that we do together. It's kind of like, wow, go feel what's inside of your body, and go breathe there and call the light, and pay attention and be curious and let it speak, right? And so then that's where it goes into the invitation for the, the voices to express themselves. So yeah, he says, so the universal consciousness should also be asked to help you to understand the expressions of the destructive infant correctly, without exaggeration, so that you don't go from ignoring it to making it a monster. And some of these lectures came in when people were much less conscious and much more identified with the mask, right? In the 60s and this, 19, so there's a way that I think a lot of times the guide first talks about, sort of this place where, people are completely unconscious of these parts of themselves at that point, and it's really important to begin to recognize it. In this day and age, I think sort of the children of that generation, in some ways, we grew up, much more sort of feeling, bad about all of these parts of us, and we had a little more consciousness that they were there, oftentimes, but it meant something was wrong with us, and we turned against them ourselves. So it's like also like just being willing to trust that what's in us is has a reason to be there, is rightfully there somehow, and welcoming it.
Darlene, what comes to my mind whenever the guide uses the term universal consciousness is the Holy Spirit in,
Yes,
say, Catholic religion or any Christ-based religion.
mm-hmm.
They say that Christ had the Holy Spirit in him. So his connection was like far advanced, so to speak. It's like when he asked, he knew how to ask, and he knew how to get, and he got his answers almost
right.
immediately, that kind of thing. Because he was so clear in his process, I guess,
Yeah, and I think he didn't have to like do the purification part of it, right? So he was already connected somehow through, his and the guide says, like he had his doubts or his limitations of understanding as well. But for certain, I like that. I agree. I think, when the guide says universal consciousness, and in some ways, I think it is, it's like how we need to understand spirituality in this day and age anyway. There was the era of the father, there was an era of the mother even before that, there was an era, then of, sort of the pure and the Christ conscious, or Jesus, then in that way, sort of, the son, but now it's really the time of the Holy Spirit's time of awakening and recognizing that what we projected onto, that the mother, the father, the son is actually everywhere within us and all around us. And it is, we can access it and we can seek it and call it, and, it will respond.
I like to think that, before I came into this earthly body, this particular one, I had a little session in the spirit world whereby, the Holy Spirit said, I'm going to be at your disposal. Problem is I completely forgot that when I got here, but the Holy Spirit is at your disposal.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and part of that, forgetting, or, like there's kind of this numbing that we do, there's a repression and a forgetting, and then some kind of numbing that happens, because it's so confusing and difficult and painful here or whatever. And so, and we're vulnerable and little, and we don't understand, and there's not really the right holding environment. There's not, we didn't come in and get met with, the love that was needed. And there is something truly, systemic in that. There's a lot of grief that is real, and wounding that is real, but it's like the guide is saying, like we're bringing that as a journey of healing, and often ancestrally, and everything, so that we can make this transformation happen.
Yes, and sort of like a universal false core image of unworthiness in some way, shape, or form, whatever, your particular, unworthiness stew might be. It manifests in that, okay, I can't communicate with the Holy Spirit because, I'm just not a good person, or I'm not good enough to get that communication,
Yeah, exactly. And so, and that's, fundamentally not true. The guide says, ask what's true, right? So those are the images that we, aspects of the images that we came in, and it's part of the journey that we have to awaken to the truth, and see, we're not perfect, but that doesn't mean that we're unworthy, that, God doesn't love us, that the Holy Spirit isn't available to us. So, and it is an awakening to that, and remembering that within life is not such a struggle. Life becomes much more supportive and creative, and, good things and bad, but still, even the difficulties, we have the support, right, to walk through them and to learn from them. So
it's really, I think what I think about whenever I pray or meditate on whatever's up, so to speak, in me, I ask for the truth of the matter. It's like the only thing I need to ask.
Amen.
I don't have to figure out what the hell to ask for. I just need to ask for the truth of the matter.
Exactly. Whenever we're in pain, like pay attention, look at what your story is, that's causing, because the way that we our understanding that, partly has this, pain story in it, and then, like, ask the truth. Is this true? Right. Exactly. And I think Byron Katie, is somebody that kind of really builds a whole awakening process around that question. And the guide himself also says that's the key.
Yeah.
So,
well, the guide says that God is truth.
Right.
So why not ask?
And love.
Why not ask for the truth?
Right. And we can know sometimes, we think, oh, that's the truth, but we can know it's probably not the total truth if there's not love with it and compassion with it as well.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that blend. So good. So he says a person can easily fluctuate from an outer self-aggrandizement to a hidden inner self-deprecation. And that's what we're talking about, right? And when the destructive infant reveals itself, one could fall prey to believing that this destructive self is the ultimate sad reality. And this is what we do. And this is another lecture we're going to be reading soon on self-identification, right? So if we think that all we are is this destructive self, then, we're going to not be happy with ourselves. But when we realize the truth, yes, it might be a part of us, but it's not all of us. That's when we can, step out of sort of a complete self-rejection or denigration. And he says, for a complete perspective on the revelation of the egotistic infant, one needs to ask constantly the guidance of the universal self. So again, what Frank was saying, what's true? You know, is this true? And so when we experience the truth of the pain body inside, you know, the wounded child, the egotistical infant, however we want to, you know, refer to this, it's a part of consciousness that is in separation, right? It doesn't know God. It's in disconnection and in some kind of suffering state. And so when we can realize that that's in us, but not all of us, right? Then, and that's that adult ego self that can then consciously activate and call forth the larger self of us, the universal self, you know, and remember the worth of one's true being, right? You know, that's not, you know, the same identity as the pain body state that we often get completely lost in. So does that make some sense? People suffered with this a lot, right? Where they totally identify with their negative traits, with their, you know, the things that don't work, with, you know, their pain body states. And you know, that creates a lot of suffering, because if, you know, that's all we are, then we, you know, we're just fighting with it and kind of creating more suffering. So this is one of those times when it really is a process of waking up, of remembering, you know, it's like, that's not the totality of who I am. And to do that while we're kind of in an activated pain body state sometimes is difficult, because from that state of consciousness, it feels like it's the only reality that there is. But if we know that we're hurting, if we know that, you know, then we can assume that there is some lack of truth if we're in that kind of suffering state. And that's where we can present it, you know, we can hold it ourselves, and we can call light to it and ask, what is the truth here? So when the infant begins to express itself more freely because the ego allows it and receives it as an interested, open listener, collect this material for further study. Whatever reveals itself should be explored for origins, results, further ramifications. What underlying misconceptions are responsible for the overt self-destruction, the hate, the spite, the malice, the ruthless self-will? You know, when we can't, you know, let go of our way, you know, what's underneath that? When the misconceptions are being recognized, guilt and self-hate diminish proportionately. What are the consequences when, for the sake of a momentary satisfaction, you give into these destructive impulses? So like when we can really, you know, recognize without guilt, without self-judgment, you know, what the true, real consequences, that helps us choose differently, right? If we judge and make ourselves wrong, then we go unconscious and keep acting it out and doing it over and over again. So when questions like these are clearly worked out, the inner determination to be destructive weakens, again, in proportion to the understanding of the particular cause and effect. If this part of the pathwork is glossed over and taken for granted without particular and exacting insight, the task is only half done. Meditation must deal with the entire problem of unconscious negativity step by step. The interaction is threefold. The observing ego must initially want it and commit itself to reaching in and exposing the negative side. It has to also ask for the help of the universal self. When the infant reveals itself, the ego should again ask for the help of the universal self to strengthen the consciousness for the further work, which is the exploration of the underlying misconceptions and the heavy price paid for them. So if we just, you know, we bring out the misconception and then we just judge it and make ourselves wrong for it, right? We can't get to this next level of understanding what those misconceptions, you know, where they came from, what, you know, that they're not the truth, and how we pay this price. So the universal self can help if we allow it. also to overcome this temptation to give in again and again to the destructive impulses. And again, you know, these impulses come through and they sort of knock us unconscious, right? So we keep waking up out of our trauma trance and realizing, oh my God, I just did it again, right? And that's a very important moment, because if we judge ourselves in that, you know, it just drives it unconscious. So that's the moment when we want to like welcome it, be curious. Who are you? Why are you doing this? You know, what do you need? What do you believe? Right? And allow that energy and that part of us to speak and reveal itself.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember many of the other lectures talking about using the word infant so often. Is there something unique about this lecture where it uses infant in there? And because I can't relate to that. I can relate to my young self maybe, but infant is like, how do I know what the infant's
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Look, and well, you know, it is a kind of an interesting question. Like I say, I struggle with that in this particular lecture, and I'm not quite sure why the guide was so strong on that. I think in a large sense, you know, it's like, you know, he really says we avoid confronting, you know, these parts of us. And so, and then when he says infant, my sense is what he's meaning there, you know, is this sort of purely instinctual, you know, my way, my need, you know, my, you know, so there's a kind of very, in the infant consciousness, right? Everything is about itself, right? And so this is young and not very conscious and very evolved, and from that place, you know, it's largely the isolated, separated self. And so from that place, the infantile consciousness, you know, the infant consciousness, infantile consciousness maybe is another way to state it, right? You know, and again, to use that word without judgment, you know, I think we hear lower self child or infant or infantile, and we think, oh, that's, you know, immaturity, that's bad, right? You know, we go almost automatically into rejecting and judging such things. And so it took me a long time before I could read all of the guide's words without, you know, thinking that there was any judgment or finger pointing in his energy, right? So see if you can hear these terms in a way of just inviting curiosity, compassion, understanding, right? And if you hear internally some judgment, see if it might be yours. You know, I can remember for the longest time when I first encountered these lectures, I knew the light in them, but I mean, I cringed and I got confused and I got lost and I couldn't even think about what my lower self was, you know, for years. And it was because I heard the voice of the guide is kind of, you know, like a finger pointing. And then one day I was listening to another one of my helpers read something from the lecture, and he was reading in this, you know, voice of matter-of-fact compassion. And then it was the first time that I really recognized, oh, that critical voice is internal. It's in me. It's my own, you know, projection onto the guide of what his voice is saying. And so I think it's important when we run across these words that we try to see them, you know, like hear them almost in a voice of deep compassion. So let me see, you know, he says, you know, we need to explore the causes embedded in our own egotistical, childish level. You know, it's not a judgment. It's just an isness. It's just a fact. It's just a reality. We're all young. We're all immature. We're all, you know, children in consciousness. And we have various levels of our own consciousness. And some of those levels are more childish, more egocentric, more, you know, infantile than other levels of our consciousness. And there's no blame or judgment. It's just kind of like part of what we're here for, is to develop that.
You know,
Yeah, that's pretty much what I thought. So I'm good.
I listened to the original lecture.
Oh, from Eva?
Yeah, today.
Oh, cool.
And there's a There's a question and answer period at the end. I don't know if it's actually in this because I didn't read this, but she says, I mean, somebody actually asks about the egotistical, selfish, demanding child consciousness. And she says that if an entity or a personality has solved that selfishness in a previous lifetime, it's unlikely that that child would display that kind of behavior. Mm-hmm. So it's like something that, you know, and I don't know, I'm sure that there are children in this world that don't have that kind of demand going on. They're just calm and different but obviously we're not one of them.
Yeah. And
we were
I think,
born of the selfish. We hadn't worked that out yet.
Right, right. And the guide says, you know, if the children would come into parents who had real mature love, they would be that way. But, you know, it's like, again, the ancestral woundings, you know, and the mission. And yes, we bring it in from other lifetimes. And we're still in this process of, you know, healing, you know, these things that, you know, our parents didn't give us the love. And so like the fear, the, you know, lack of holding environment, you know, like makes us contract and feel like it's life or death. And we have to, you know, you know, do whatever it is to survive. You know, when we feel received, loved, held, trauma doesn't happen. And then also the guide talks about our soul dance, right? You know, so we choose the parents that are going to activate the soul dance, and we bring them in. And he says there are places in our soul where, like, usually we're resilient, you know, so we take a blow and we just kind of bounce back, you know, but where the soul dents are, the blows from life come in and there's no bouncing back. We kind of collapse into them, and then they, you know, the whole life configures around them because we, you know, we have difficulty there.
Well, also the answer to the question seemed to insinuate that a selfish child would only be born to a selfish parent so that they could kind of both wake up, or the child would actually be a reflection of the selfishness in the parent.
Yeah, I think it is. I think, you know, it's a natural process of evolution and co-creation, and we're coming here, you know, to wake up out of that, to grow beyond it, and to see it, you know, and make a different choice. And so if our soul, if it has not chosen before in a different way, then it's gonna, you know, we're gonna come in where we are and continue the journey to, you know, face the consequence, to see the truth, to see if we can learn a different response, different choice. But I think it's also, you know, there's a kind of biological aspect of it, you know, like, and if we study consciousness, and maybe, you know, now, you know, all the indigo children or whatever, they're being born sort of into this planet, you know, much more conscious than many of us that came in, you know. But I think,
did you call them indigo children?
Well, there's a whole bunch of writings out there about, you know, different indigo crystal children, rainbow children, you know, like, and they seem to be sort of these souls that are more advanced, that are incarnating into the planet, you know, and the children seem to be, you know, quite different than, you know, most children. And so, you know, that could be an example of, you know, what you're talking about, you know, that they've evolved kind of past that state. Yeah. But they also are coming in, you know, probably to families and parents that know how to hold them, or, you know, not perfect, of course, but, you know.
Does that word indigo have something to do with the highest level on the chakra, the color of the indigo on?
Yeah, it could, although the indigo seems to be the earliest ones, you know, like even people of my generation, you know, can be indigo children. And then, like, sort of later on, you get into even higher vibrations of crystalline and rainbow and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't follow it too much. There are people that, really map it out a lot.
I
You
like
can
that.
probably Google it on and get all kinds of
Yes.
stuff on it.
Indigo children. I kind of like that.
So for us anyway, meditation
We are the selfish
is
ones.
an absolute prerequisite here. It means in gathering yourself calmly, quietly wanting to know the truth of this particular circumstance and its causes. This is why for me, I like this, hi, I see you, and this kind of curious approach, like this befriending and curious thing when I become aware of some, pained part in me or confused part or lost part. And he says, then you need to quietly wait for an answer. So this is that receptive place that is so important. And in this state of mind, peace will come to you even before you fully understand why you have a particular negativity. This truthful approach to life will already give you a measure of the peace and self-respect you lacked as long as you held others responsible for what you had to suffer. If such meditation is cultivated, you will discover a side of yourself that you have never known. In fact, you will come to know two aspects. The highest universal powers will communicate themselves to you to help you discover your most destructive, ignorant side, which needs insight, purification, and change. And I believe love, it's like, I don't think anything can change without love, right? And so we need the insight and the love to make the purification and change happen. Through your willingness to accept your lower self, the higher self will become more of a real presence in you. By the act of our loving our own lower self, right? We actually activate the highest in us, and that spills over to other people. If we don't fully love ourselves, we don't fully really love each other either. So he says, in fact, you will increasingly experience this as your real self, so that despair about being bad, weak, or inadequate will fall by the wayside.
That line where it says the highest universal powers will communicate themselves to you to help you discover your most destructive, ignorant side, which needs insight, purification, and change. The communication can sometimes be a little hazy. Not so initially apparent,
And this is why I like to ground it, right? And how I do this in this process meditation that I teach, is like, so if we go into our bodies, or we go into our life experience, like, like either through the story or through the direct and immediate experience of contraction and tension or heaviness or, some kind of block of the flow of life force and, stuff in our bodies, that is where we are, there present. And we may not understand, well, what is this thing that's tight there, or, this part that, believes this story and that kind of thing. So to me, that's where then we want to activate the higher self, right? We get present and we notice these things in us that are, admixed in some way, right? Have, negative currents. And so then we need to understand it. We need to know really what is deep within it. And so that's when, we can ask and call clarity and light. And I find that in doing that, also, if you just stay present with wherever you're focused, ideally in your body, in the sensation, even if it's a negative story, it's going to create a place in your body that feels, not open and full of life and flowing and free. And so where you can be present to that in your consciousness, and through breath, through prayer, you can actually just stay there and hold a space of curiosity. And as you do that, oftentimes intuition, insight, some image comes up, some, revelation, maybe a feeling starts releasing. And in the process of, flowing with the feeling, and not judging it or stopping it because you don't understand it. You just go with it, and in the movement of the feeling itself, the wisdom or the reality, of what it's holding becomes conscious. And so to me, it's in that place where we ground it in the body in some way, and then just stay present and call the light there, and then it often starts moving, and we see something more.
I like to think of it as the manifestation of grace.
Uh-huh.
Like truth is delivered on the wings of grace,
Uh-huh.
so to speak.
And we have to be calm and receptive to receive that, so if we're uptight, or we're unhappy with the way we are, or we judge, or like then we don't have the open satellite, that can receive that incoming grace.
And it may not, it doesn't, like she says, it doesn't come, can't always come immediately. It may
Right.
manifest weeks later in some other way.
Right.
Like you may witness someone else receiving some kind of truth, and you'll be like, oh, that's the truth that I was looking for.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, that happened to me so many times during
Mhm.
group in
Right.
Pathwork.
Exactly.
Somebody would have a realization, and I'd be like, I get it now.
Yeah.
And okay, so many times.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The guidance comes in many forms, through others, through, yeah, just nature for me oftentimes, has some kind of revelatory, or even just sitting, like when I sit in the energy, and it moves and releases, like oftentimes even, maybe I'm just, feel a wave of grief come through me, and I don't even know what that grief is. But then as I'm, moving it, all of a sudden some, realization or understanding happens. So to me, it's kind of like in the presence of the energies, right? That's where the information is that we're seeking, that the guide says that we need to understand, right? And so if we can, really listen to ourselves instead of judge or try to fix ourselves, right? It's a different, very receptive kind of process, and curious, and like seeing how amazing we are, and how all of these things are, not to be judged or blamed, but like, wow, God gave us all of this. It's a big puzzle on the blackboard, and he gave it to me, kind of knowing that I have within me this capacity to unravel it all, right? And I've probably worked on it for other lifetimes before. So if I don't get it completed in this lifetime, it's like there's not any judgment or blame. There's, just this movement of expansion and understanding and healing that we're doing.
I also believe that our work is cumulative.
Absolutely.
One lifetime to the next. It's like, you're working on something, you're working on something, you're working on something, and you may not ever really, really get it right. But that work that you are doing it's going to be cumulative in the next life.
Yeah, and I even believe that a lot of those things, even though we can't complete them, on this side of the veil, like where we've given a lot of effort and work and stuff, that it's something when we get to the other side that is, relatively accessible for a more complete healing. That there is kind of a grace of all of that effort, and somehow in the freeing of that, that pain body, will not necessarily have to come back with us. It's like it can be lifted in the crossing over or thereafter. Mm-hmm. So the conscious ego self must decide for this integration and fight for it. Otherwise, the universal self cannot get through to the blocked off areas. see, did I read that first part? So you said up above it, let me just go back up there.
Yeah, I think you need to go
Yeah,
to many
yeah.
people meditate, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and through your willingness, so we did read that, to accept your lower self, the higher self will become more and more of a real presence. And so many people meditate, but they neglect the two-sidedness of the endeavor and miss out on integration. They may indeed actualize some of the universal powers that come into play wherever the personality is sufficiently free, positive, open, but the unfree, negative, closed areas are neglected. The actualized universal powers will not by themselves enforce an integration with the undeveloped part of the self. The conscious ego self must decide for this integration and fight for it. Otherwise, the universal self cannot get through to the blocked off areas. Partial integration alone with the universal self may lead to even greater self-deception if the consciousness is diluted by the actually existing partial integration with divine powers and becomes even more prone to overlook the neglected side. This makes for lopsided development. And it's also kind of how the task gets more subtle, but is equally important as we do develop. I mean, probably none of us here has to work on our, like the part that would actually murder someone, right? But the murderous feelings inside, may still be, something that, we're transforming and stuff. And so, like in some ways, if we have these moments of light, and we see this in a lot of gurus and teachers, right? That they kind of think they've arrived in some sense, or they, don't continue to use this light that they're gaining to completely purify. And of course, it gets subtler and subtler as we go. And the guide says in one of the other lectures, I think that, like the more conscious we are, the more self-responsibility we have, even for these subtle deviations. So, oftentimes we get to a certain level and then we sort of identify more with the grandiosity of that development, and that down we go again. We've fallen. I think there's an old Hindu teaching story about Indra, and how he develops all of these wonderful castles and creations, and then the minute that he completes and says, wow, what a good boy am I, like then all of a sudden he regresses back to the level of the ants, crawling around. So there's a way that we want to find self-love, right, in a way that also remains humble and aware that we're always imperfect, and not to take our what we've been given through grace and through spirit, right, and kind of claim it for the ego self.
Yeah, we have to be humble on the front end and humble on the back end. We have to have enough humility to ask for help, and then when we get the help, we have to have enough humility to receive it without saying, "Oh, look what a smart ass I am!" All of a sudden, Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So he goes on and he says the next step in meditation, right? So, and we can back up here a little bit, right? In terms of following this as a meditation practice, right? Because at this point, I think we are just sitting present to all of these parts of us, right? And becoming aware and seeking them out, in the contractions in our bodies and the negative stories, and becoming, aware that there are these pain bodies that are, activated in our lives. And so, and then once we're, aware, the next step is to kind of like recognize and re-educate the destructive part. Again, he uses the word infant, that is now no longer entirely unconscious. And so he says this infant, with its false beliefs, its stubborn resistance, its spitefulness and murderous rage, must be reoriented. And it may be he's using these terms now, like, I don't know, has everybody on this call gotten to your spitefulness and murderous rage and stubborn resistance? Do you know that inside of you, right? You know, have you felt that infant within you in some way?
Especially in politics.
I tell you, I had some murderous rage along the way the last couple of months where concerning certain politicians. I felt like I could pull the trigger on them. I really did.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And so, you know, it does feel like from that place, you know, we can feel how full of rage it is. And sometimes, you know, that rage feels like, you know, I am Oz the Great and Terrible, and I'm going to like set the atomic bomb off and blow up every individual in this, you know, universe. And it seems sort of great and powerful, and, you know, but at some level, can you feel that rage and murderousness from the infantile level? Can you know, because a part of it is this completely powerlessness aspect, right? And who in us is the one who is completely powerless? It's the infant, right?
Yeah, and a unfairness. I felt this
Yeah,
sense of unfairness
pain
that
of
I felt when I
injustice.
was an infant and nobody would, you know, I didn't have a say. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, we can see that a level of this, you know, goes back to this kind of powerlessness and this kind of, you know, like in some ways, you know, okay, I'm going to grow up and be big enough so that I'm never powerless again. You know, it's like there's this strong, and part of the journey is that, you know, to activate our powers and all of that. But ultimately, you know, everything we love, we're going to lose. You know, we are powerless in so many ways in this world, right? So there's this coming to terms with that. And as an infant, you know, we can't, but as an adult now we can re-educate and help that infant in its powerlessness find truth, find security, find, you know, like the container to hold, you know, its feelings, its pain, that kind of thing. And he says, re-education cannot take place unless we're fully aware of every aspect of the destructive infant's beliefs and attitudes. And again, we can learn those just by listening, right? You know, hearing inside what it wants. So it's not like you have to kind of get this whole story completed. It's like in the moment, go in and feel what's there and understand what is expressing in terms of belief and attitude. So he says, it's not a sequential process. The phases overlap. Exploration, understanding, and re-education often go hand in hand, while at other times they must proceed separately. The sensitivity for this must be cultivated. No rules can be made to relieve you of the need to feel into yourself, to know what to use and when. It is easy to look past what is stagnant in you, even if the first meditational approach is used properly and you are capable of seeing new aspects of the destructive child. The second part of the process may be neglected. So an understanding of the cause and effect might not be worked through, or perhaps a third aspect of re-education is not fully undertaken. But when we go through the entire process, a tremendous strengthening of your whole self takes place. And so most of our work scenes really are kind of like this, right? And so we get so far, and sometimes we go all the way and we do all of the levels, you know, and other times we're, you know, we're just sitting and becoming more conscious of what it is, and we may not, you know, get all the way through. But oftentimes that, you know, journey can happen, and we really can experience this kind of movement of into, through, and out the other side of these places within us. And so he says, when you go through the entire process, a tremendous strengthening of your whole self takes place. In the first place, your conscious ego personality itself becomes stronger and healthier. It will be stronger in a good, relaxed sense, and more determined, with more determined awareness, meaningful directedness, and a greater power of concentration with one-pointed attention. Second, you will cultivate a much greater self-acceptance and understanding of reality. Unreal self-hate and self-disgust will go away. Equally, unreal claims for specialness and perfection also go away. False spiritual pride and vanity, as well as false self-humiliation and shame, disappear. Through the steady activation of the higher powers, the self feels less and less forlorn, helpless, lost, hopeless, or empty. The whole sense of the universe in all its marvelous possibilities reveals itself from within, as the reality of this wider world shows you the way to accept and change. Accept and change, right? The two go hand in hand. You cannot change without the acceptance. Your destructive inner child, or whatever part you want to label it as. This gradual change enables you to accept all your feelings and let the energy flow through your being. When your small, petty, mean side is accepted without thinking that it is the total final reality, then the beauty, love, wisdom, and infinite power of the superior self become more real. This power cannot lead to unrealistic arrogance, specialness, and self-idealization when you are constantly dealing with your lower self. Such an attitude leads to balanced development, integration, and a deep, reassuring sense of your own reality. Realistic, well-founded, self-liking must result. When you see the truth in yourself and it becomes second nature to want and commit yourself to this truth, you will detect an ugly side in you, which until this point you were too resistant to see. Simultaneously, you will also detect this great universal spiritual power that is in you and that is in fact you. Paradoxical as it may seem, the more you can accept the mean little creature, the ignorant infant in you without losing your sense of self-worth, the better you will perceive the greatness of your innermost being, provided you truly do not use your discoveries about the little self to beat yourself down. So, and I wanna like, so the guide is kind of focusing here on the sort of power mask aspect of the infant, of the child, I think in some ways, right? And so let's see if, like not only is the lower self aspect of the child in our meanness and our selfishness, it can also be sort of, in our submission or in our fear, right? And so, we can, like, again, see the fear without self-judgment, because oftentimes if we have a lot of fear, we realize it's in our way, we get angry at the fear, we fight the fear, we're afraid of the fear, and all of this just adds to the difficulty. And so, in the same way, it's like we don't want to use any of our discoveries to beat ourselves down. And yet the little self kind of wants to seduce the conscious ego to stay within those narrow confines of self-judgment, of self-beating, of hopelessness and, helplessness, which always cover unexpressed hatred. The conscious ego must prevent this stratagem using all its knowledge and resources. Observe this habit of self-beating, hopelessness, and capitulation in yourself and counteract it, not by pushing it underground again, but by using what you know. Talking to this part of yourself, you can bring to bear on it all the knowledge of your conscious ego. And if this is not sufficient, request the powers beyond your consciousness to come to your help. So there's this dialogue, this, interaction. And we think, well, how can I be the part of me that's lost and, afraid or negative, and the higher self me? But we're always splitting in some way, we're the lower self me and the part that's judging it, right? So this is not as mysterious as it seems. And there is a way that we can, both, be consciously connected but not identified with the negativity, and consciously identified or accessing this higher self, and that creates then this bowl that is welcoming the negativity, is holding the negativity, is curious, and wanting to dialogue with the negativity. Who are you? What do you need? Why are you there? Where did you come from? All of these can be resourced, by just being present to what's alive within us.
This is one that I have a difficult time with, Darlene, in that there's a part of me, well, I sometimes do part-time little home repair work in my community. And when I'm doing a little project and I'm in the middle of it and something goes haywire, or I'll cross wire some electrical or whatever, there's this, as old stuff just comes and beats the hell out of myself. And then I'll be conscious enough to say, well, what are you beating yourself for? And then the answer goes like, why, you stupid idiot, you did it, so it's like I'm allowing ego against ego. It's like, what the hell?
Yes, exactly. Good. So right. And in some ways, it's like we have to wake up this part of us that sees what's going on, that doesn't, we're at this split where one part of us notices it and we're feeling the pain of it and we want it to get off our backs, but it's still totally identified. We're all fucked up. We
I can see it. I can see it now. I'm in it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the split between the two children, right? It's like the slightly older child that's trying to control the messed up, one that did the mistake. And so in that dynamic, there isn't a higher self or even the conscious ego yet, right? You, in that dynamic, you have to awaken the presence of just the conscious ego, that sees both of them. Oh, I'm in that battle again. And then maybe one by one, goes in and says, who are you? And if that voice says, well, you idiot, can't you tell? It's like it's really not addressing that you at that point, right? And also, that voice can sort of, look at what happens when you treat yourself that way. How do you feel inside? Is that, pay attention to the action and the consequences, right? Because I think this voice does believe that in some ways, by beating on us, it will somehow correct us, prevent other people from correcting or punishing us, right? And make us do better next time. But
never works.
Exactly. Like we've done this a million times. And so now that's a part of the conscious ego we can bring to bear the truth. And then again, the conscious ego can call on even a wider horizon, but the conscious ego can even come in and speak to it and say, I understand that you feel this way, but we've done this all our life. It hasn't really worked. Right. And notice how it makes you feel, just kind of, and maybe calling in the higher self. What do you need so that you don't feel so bad? What could relax you out of this, pain and fear that you are feeling and then inflicting on yourself?
Yeah, usually about the only words I have now been able to get up is I ask for help. That's about as much as I can get out because I'm just buried in this old self-beating.
And so, the fact that it's so familiar, it becomes kind of a trauma trance. And it's difficult. We have to wake up inside of it and then wake up out of it. And sometimes we wake up inside of it for some time before we can actually wake up out of it. Right. But part of what I find is really, really useful because it's the story that hooks us. It's the words. And every one of those words is actually being mirrored in our feelings and in our energies. So one of the little tricks that I use to help separate out of this identification that we kind of unconsciously, habitually fall into is I say, okay, just pay attention in your body to what you're feeling now, right? And don't use words like abandonment or something like that because that's a story, right? What are your sensory, signals in your body? What's happening in your body? You know, are you clenching your jaw? Are your shoulders up to your ears? Is your heart blocked and numb? You know, like that kind of thing. And when we can begin to just notice that and interact consciously with that, the sensations and the space and the, you know, energies there, then we can actually hold and work with it. So, you know, part of the practice I think that would be useful for you, you know, and some of this, Dick, I don't know, you know, it's like part of, you know, what I do in the groups and in my individual work is, you know, you learn this by practicing it, right? And so it's a kind of guided process that I can take people in and you know, help them learn how to navigate in there, and then after a while you kind of figure it out and can do more and more on your own. But you know, it's kind of like the support for staying present, and we need that because in some level we do. The pain bodies knock us unconscious, and the guide is saying here there's a part of us that doesn't want to wake up. You know, it's like,
Well,
and
still
so
believes the old stupid program.
yeah, it's
If
the
I beat
old
myself
program.
hard enough, I'll change. I mean, it's so
Right.
ridiculous. But it's
Right.
runs.
Exactly. And so you now know that's not true. So see if you can just, you know, like, I mean, again, you know, just noticing that it's that old program, you judge it, that old stupid program, you know. So this is the key, is we have to get outside of the judgment piece, right? Because we just keep stepping back, you know, and judging and then judging and then judging. And so we have to keep stepping back and accepting and accepting and accepting. You
Well,
know,
it's getting quicker. The other thing I've noticed in body is my heart was really hurting, actually, when I go into that. And for hours afterward, and it's like, whoa, this is,
yeah,
so that's kind of a wake up. Is like, well, is it worth getting a heart attack? You know, it's
exactly. And if you listen to that hurting heart, see, this is part of this meditation, right? You know, it shouldn't, it's probably not so good to walk around with it for hours and hours or days and days. And it does, like when we do those things to us, we do that kind of, you know, like attack, self-attack, or, you know, and our bodies are reacting and parts of us are freaking out inside. So it's like, it's to me really important, right? When we feel like that pain, you know, to go clear it. Like that's, like there's, in the bottom of all of this, in my understanding, is you know, the simple hurt that the guide says that we're always avoiding feeling, and in some ways that's grief, that's the loss, you know, like you fucked up on the, you know, way that you wired the thing. There's some kind of inner grief and loss that you just need to face and feel, having done that, you know. And it may not even be as significant as it gets made into, you know, behind the fact that we don't feel it, right, you know. And sometimes it's a bigger grief and loss, but what we need to do is we need to go in and hold the hurting so that there's a container so that the grief can happen, because it's the grieving that releases that. It goes in, it gets stuck in us, right? And if it'll eventually work its way through, you know, if we try to go on and everything. But this is what I think the guide is asking us to do, is much more of a proactive, like realize when, you know, there's stuff stuck and we're in negativity inside of us, even if it's not our conscious ego, you know, all these holding places or these heart hurting places or whatever they are, you know, they need our love and attention and releasing. It's the way the body is carrying all of this unmet pain and grief, and it will eventually somatize and kill us. So it's through the feeling of it that we clear our field and give the body a break, right, as well as the psyche. And they say, like, the grieving, it actually renews, right? You know, you can go forward then fresh again. And without the grief, you know, we just stay kind of slowly getting heavier and heavier and stucker and more unhappy.
got it. Yeah, good. Thank you.
So we're only about halfway through, and we got about half an hour. So see if we can finish this. He says another important aspect of getting to know both the lowest and the highest in you is that you realize the function, the capacities, but also the limitations of the conscious ego. On the conscious level, the ego's function is wanting to see the full truth of both the lowest and highest in you, wanting with all of its strength to change and give up destructiveness. The limitation is that the ego consciousness cannot execute this alone. And this is very important because, this is part of where we get into trouble is we think we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to correct ourselves, perfect ourselves, get rid of all. And, we must turn for help and guidance to the universal self and wait patiently without doubting or impatiently pushing. This waiting needs an open attitude about the way the help might manifest. The fewer preconceived notions one has, the faster the help will come forth and be recognized. Help from the universal consciousness may come in an entirely different manner than your concepts may make room for. And this might prove to be an obstacle. An open, waiting, accepting, and positive attitude is also necessary, though recognizing its absence can also become a constructive acknowledgement of where the self is at the moment. So, again, I think that's an important sentence there in a way, because, he's aiming us and saying, well, this is where we want to go, but we get so trapped in this place of, well, I'm not there and therefore I'm bad, or therefore it's not okay. And so he's saying, we need to have that open, waiting, accepting, and positive attitude, even when we recognize that we don't have an open waiting. It's like we have to have open, waiting, accepting, positivity when we notice that we're still stuck, when we're still lost, when we're still frustrated or whatever is there. And allow what is kind of the first movement. And then from that, receiving of what is here within us now, then the presence of the aware consciousness can assess and it can call on the higher self where it feels like it, is lost or needs something more. So there are many different kinds of meditation. There's religious meditation, which consists of reciting set prayers. There's meditation in which the main emphasis is put on increasing the powers of concentration. In another type of meditation, spiritual laws are contemplated and thought through. There is meditation in which the ego is made totally passive and willless, and the divine allowed its own flux. These and other forms of meditation may have more or less value, but my suggestion to the friends who work with me is to use the available energy and time for confronting that part of the self that destroys happiness, fulfillment, and wholeness. You can never create the wholeness you truly aspire to, whether or not this aim is articulated, if you bypass this confrontation. This approach includes giving voice to the recalcitrant aspect of the egotistic, destructive self, which denies happiness and fulfillment and beauty for any reason. So again, don't suppress it, don't judge it, give it voice, let it speak so that we can see it, understand it, and see probably in the end, we recognize, oh, it's just in pain. It's just doing that because it's lost, right? And when we can open our hearts to it, then we can, begin the healing process. So far, we have discussed two phases of the meditation process. First, the recognition of the unconscious, destructive, egotistical self, and then the understanding of the underlying misconceptions, the cause, the effect, the meaning, and the price to be paid. The third phase is the reorientation and re-education of the destructive part of the self. What I say now must be taken with great care, otherwise the subtleties involved will not be communicated. Re-education might very easily be misunderstood and lead toward a renewed suppression or repression of the destructive part that is beginning to unfold. You have to take great care and deliberately aim to avoid this, without, however, allowing the destructive part to engulf you. Another way to say that is don't identify completely with the destructive part. It's not all of you. And sometimes that happens, right? And then we can just recognize, oh, I'm just engulfed by my destructive part. I'll wake up a little while later down the road. I don't have to, fight that. I just have to realize I'm not at a place where I should be making, important decisions, right? Because I'm not truly in reality. But I can trust that the destructive part is here and it's gonna, move through me. It's coming out to share itself. It needs to express something. The universe is giving me another opportunity to study it and try to, help it. So the best attitude toward the unfolding destructive part is one of detached observation, of unjudging, unharried acceptance. The more it unfolds, the more you must remind yourself that neither the truth of its existence nor its destructive attitudes are final. They are not the only attitudes you have, nor are they absolute. Above all, you have the power inherent in you to change anything. You may lack the incentive to change when you are not fully aware of the damage the destructive part of you does to your life when it goes unrecognized. It is therefore an important aspect of this phase of the pathwork to meditate, to look deeply and widely for indirect manifestations. How does unexpressed hate manifest in your life? Perhaps by feeling undeserving and afraid, or by inhibiting your energies. This is only one example. All indirect manifestations have to be explored. It is important here to remind yourself that where there is life, there is constant movement, even if this movement is temporarily paralyzed. Matter is paralyzed life stuff. The frozen blocks of energy in your body are momentarily hardened, immobilized life stuff. This life stuff can always be made to move again, but only consciousness can do it. I want to, interject here a little. Like that's one of the techniques that I like to use is like I'm, in my body feeling some frozen, immobilized life stuff, this block, this no. And so just holding that, accepting it being there, but also breathing like the breath of life, the Holy Spirit, right, into the space that it inhabits. And with the breath is like the invitation of movement, it's okay. You can move. And I often imagine giving a space around it, that's kind of a contained, loving, holding space that's bigger than the one it's holding for itself. It's like it's tight. And I say, it's okay. I'm holding you. You can come out this far. I've got you. And so then that, makes it feel safe enough to let go of the defensive holding because it has a sense of my presence there and this container for it. And so it begins to move. And then in the movement, more consciousness comes. And then I see it more clearly and and seeing it, we love it more. We recognize it, we forgive it. We understand ourselves. And that allows it more comfort and more movement and more freedom and more, oh, you mean I can just be, I don't have to, I'm not bad. I don't have to be a certain way, right? So all of this energy opens and can flow again. So meditation must mean above all that the part of you that is already conscious and moving actually intends to make the blocked energy and dim consciousness moving and aware again. The best way to do this is to allow the frozen and dim consciousness, first of all, to express itself. So oftentimes I'm in there, I'm holding it, and part of that expression is, can you move, right? I'll give you space to move. I invite you to move. That's the first level maybe of expression. Or maybe I hear, like it's kind of all tense and stuck inside. And so like the senses, like, oh, that's just a big no, what am I knowing to, right? So we can kind of try to penetrate and understand and seek to read the expressions of these consciousnesses within us and seek to understand. Here you need a receptive attitude instead of a reaction that what comes forth is devastating and catastrophic. The panicky attitude towards one's own unfolding destructive infant does more damage than the destructive infant itself. You must learn to listen to it, to take it in, to calmly receive its expressions without hating yourself, without pushing the infant away. Only with such an attitude can you come to understand the causes of its underlying destructiveness. And when you usually see them, right, you know, like the recognition, the understanding, and the compassion that comes, like, helps a lot. And without that, you know, we just fight against ourselves or judge it. So when we can understand ourselves, then that opens, and then the process of re-education can begin. The denying, panicky, frightened, self-rejecting, and perfection-demanding attitude usually makes every part of this meditation impossible. It does not permit unfoldment. It does not permit exploration of the causes of what might be unfolded. And it certainly does not permit re-education. It is the accepting and understanding attitude that enables the conscious ego to assert its benign dominion over violently destructive and stagnant psychic matter. As I have said many times, kindness, firmness, and deep determination against your own destructiveness are necessary. It is a paradox. Identify with the destructiveness and yet be detached from it. It's like, it feels to me more like, you know, identify it, allow, you know, temporarily identify with it to allow it to speak, but, you know, stay in this kind of space of holding it. It's kind of like, to me, the Russian nesting dolls or the concentric circles, right? There's the negative center, and then around that, I'm bigger than that, and I'm holding that. And then around that is the Holy Spirit and the higher self of me, you know, and the divine universal force that's holding me as well. And as we accept that it is within us, it is us, but also that there is another part of us that has the final word when we can so choose. And sometimes that process of getting to choice is part of what this journey is about. For this, you need to widen the limitations of your conscious ego expression to include saying at any moment, I will be stronger than my destructiveness and will not be hampered by it. I determine that my life will be at its best and fullest, and that I will and can overcome the blocks in me that make me want to remain unhappy. This determination of mine will bring in the higher powers that will make me capable of experiencing more and more bliss, because I can let go of the doubtful pleasure of being negative, which I now fully recognize. This is the task of the conscious ego. Then and only then can it also call into play the powers of guidance, wisdom, strength, and a new inner feeling of love that comes from being penetrated by the universal self. So again, here he's saying, you know, like our conscious ego, it needs to just get to choice. It can't make it happen. It can't will the, you know, better self to, you know, exist, but it can see and it can affirm and make a choice in the heart of what it chooses, what it wants. And just by doing that, then that activates the universal forces, right, to support. And, you know, it may be a process and it won't happen just overnight, but it's through that active inner recognition and simple choice that we set these forces in motion that will, you know, take us to this transformational process. Re-education too has to proceed through the relationship of the three interactive levels, just as it was necessary for making the destructive side conscious and exploring its deeper meaning. Re-education depends on the efforts of both the conscious ego with its instruction to dialogue with the ignorant child, and on the intervention and guidance of the universal spiritual self. Each in its own way will affect the gradual maturing of this infant. The ego determines its goal to change the consciousness of the negative inner child by wanting this and committing itself to it. This is its task. Full execution of this task is made possible by the spiritual influx from the deeper personality that has to be deliberately activated. Hence, the consciousness must again adopt a twofold approach. One is activity that asserts its desire to transform the self-defeating aspects, which leads to the dialogue, but calmly but firmly instructing seeking the truth and bringing the truth to that part that doesn't know the truth, right? And then the other is a more receptive, passive, patiently waiting for the influx, for the final gradual, manifestation of the universal powers. And it is they who bring about the inner change when the feelings lead to new and more resilient reactions. Thus, good feelings will replace those which were negative or dead. Rushing and pressuring the resisting part is useless and ineffective as accepting its direct refusal to budge, right? So it's like we can't push it, we can't force it, nor do we want to just give up because we feel it's resistance. When the conscious ego does not recognize that there is a part of the self that actually refuses every step towards self-unfoldment and the good life, a counteractive movement may be one of hurried and patient pressure, and both derive from self-hate. You may feel stymied and hopeless. Take it as take it as a sign for you to search for that part in you that says, I do not wish to change. I do not wish to be constructive. Set out and find this voice. Use the meditative dialogue here again to explore and let the worst in you express itself. You can see, my friends, how expressing the negative part, exploring its meaning, cause and effect, and re-educating it must be a constantly fluctuating process, alternating and often simultaneous. See how the three levels of interaction combine in the effort of purification and integration. Meditation functions here as a constant articulation of what was previously unarticulated. Often I go and I feel something and I have no idea what it is. It's like, oh, this is a heaviness. I wake up in the morning, brain fog or, some kind of contracted state I went to bed with. I don't know. I was in my night, doing some journeying or something. And so, I just am there with it and kind of curious until it can articulate itself. It will speak if we just open and listen. It is a threefold communication and confrontation, from the ego toward the destructive self and from the ego toward the universal self, so that the universal can affect both the ego and the destructive self. And sometimes I find that, my ego will recognize a pain state, but it doesn't have the truth. It can't seem to find the truth, or, sometimes I know automatically, oh, that's an image or that's not right because, but sometimes I'm pretty lost in it, right? And that's another place where I don't have the answer, but I'm there with the child and I'm saying, I hear you, I hear your concern, I hear your question, I hear your pain. I don't know. Let me ask, let me go seek the higher wisdom. And so we can, in that place then call the light. And says our own sensitivity will grow day by day to feel what exactly is needed at any given point on your evolutionary path. And that also feels really true as you work with this, right? What comes will come, what's needed will come. And each day brings forth new tasks, exciting tasks, beautiful tasks. They should not be approached in the spirit of wanting to get it over with, as if only then could life begin. On the contrary, the meditative process is living at its best. You may begin each meditation by asking yourself, what do I really feel at this moment about this or that issue? In what respect am I dissatisfied? What is it I may be disregarding? And that's the psychic, and then also looking into the body. What's my body do? And then you may request the universal spirit in you to help you find these particular answers. Wait, trusting for what may unfold. Only when some part of you unfolds can you have a direct confrontation, communication, or dialogue with it and ask it further questions as well as instruct it. With patience and determination, you can remold the distorted part, but only after it has fully expressed itself. And it's very important that, it needs to express, because there's a piece of truth in it. It's like you have to discover the piece of truth in it, even if there's a lot of distortion and confusion. Once you do that, then it's like its message has been delivered and it will let go. So We have to let that part express itself fully and then seek, like what's the divinity and what's the distortion? Where is there not truth here? But where is it? Maybe it's a temporary truth. It's not a universal truth, but there's a temporary truth. Like, God, this sucks. I hate this. Or, I just feel like crying. Like all of these things are, a piece of truth that it's not ultimate reality, but it is the truth of the moment. And that also needs to be received. And so with patience and determination, we can remold the distorted part as it fully expresses itself. You can reform, reorient stagnant psychic energies with your willingness to be totally honest, totally constructive, loving, and open. If you find an unwillingness in this regard, then that must be simply confronted, explored, and re-educated. This is the only meaningful way in which meditation can move your life toward the resolution of problems, towards growth and fulfillment, and toward unfolding your best potential. If you do this, my friends, the time will come when trusting life will no longer sound like a vague, faraway theory that you cannot put into personal action. Instead, your trust in life, as well as self-love in the healthiest sense, will fill you more and more based on realistic considerations instead of wishful thinking. The paradoxes and opposites that you constantly deal with in life will be reconciled. This is important, particularly when you meditate on this threefold interaction within you. So I think we'll pause here. He goes on and brings up a couple of really useful, splits. Like this is what I'm saying, like a lot of our splits, they're both and they're true and false. They have to be worked through. And so he takes three examples of these kind of confusions and splits in our understanding and shows, how to integrate them. So I think we're coming to our time. I mean, I can go, we don't have that much more. We're on 10 of 13. Are people willing to stay on for a little while longer?
I'm going to jump off, but
Okay.
This has been really great, Darlene. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Good.
Bye, guys.
We'll practice it some more soon.
You bet.
Good night.
So I can also, do you guys want to jump off here now too, or are you good to go?
I'm good for a while longer.
Okay, I think we're almost done. So, so he says, human beings desire, for only desire. Oh, let me move up above. So the paradoxes and opposites that you constantly deal with in life will be reconciled. So one paradox that he talks about is both desire and desirelessness are important spiritual attitudes. And to the dualistic separated mind, they seem like opposites, which lead to confusion about which is right or wrong. So human beings desire, for only desire can bring you to the fourth aspect of meditation. This is the expansion of your conscious concepts in order to create new and better life substance, hence life experience. This is the creation I've spoken about in previous lectures. If you do not desire a better state of being and more fulfillment, you will have no material to create and mold life substance. Visualization of a fuller state presupposes desire. These concepts must be fostered by the conscious ego, and the universal consciousness must intervene to help create a more expanded state. If you see desire and desirelessness as mutually exclusive, you cannot grasp or feel the necessary attitude. Desire must exist for one to believe in new possibilities and to unfold into the greater states of fulfillment and self-expression. But if desire is tense, urgent, and contracted, it forms a block. Such desire implies, I do not believe that what I want can happen. It's kind of unrequited desire, which is perhaps the result of an underlying energy that says I really don't want it, or I don't want to have to pay the price for it, or there's other, aspects of the resistance there. And because of some misconception, unjustified fear, or unwillingness to pay the price. So this underlying denial creates too tense a desire. And therefore, a kind of desirelessness must be present, which could be expressed as a statement, I know I can and will have such and such, even if it is not realizable right now in this or that specific form. I trust the universe and my own goodwill sufficiently that I can wait and will strengthen myself along the way to cope well with the temporary frustration of this desire. So what are the common denominators of healthy desire and healthy desirelessness, which make meditation and indeed all life expression real and beautiful? First, there is an absence of fear and the presence of trust. If you fear frustration, unfulfillment, and their consequences, the tension of your soul movement will prohibit the fulfillment you want. Eventually, you will even give up all desire. Then desirelessness will be distorted, misunderstood, and of the wrong kind, because too much tense desire is present. In the final analysis, such tense desire comes from fear caused by the infantile belief that you will be annihilated if you do not have what you want. Hence, you do not trust your ability to cope with the lack of fulfillment, which makes you inordinately frightened of it. So the vicious circle continues. The fear induces a cramp that becomes a denial of desire. These very subtle, obscure attitudes need to be explored in your meditation so that you can come to the fourth stage of meaningful meditation. In this stage, you express your desire with confidence in your ability to cope, both with non-fulfillment and fulfillment, and therefore with a benign universe capable of yielding to you what you long for. The obstacles along the way can be dealt with when you know that the ultimate state of bliss will be yours anyway. Then desire and desirelessness will not be irreconcilable paradoxes, but complementary attitudes. Similarly, it seems paradoxical to postulate that both involvement and detachment must exist in the healthy psyche. Again, there must be a twofold approach to the understanding of this seeming contradiction. If detachment is indifference, because you are afraid to be involved and unwilling to risk pain and scared of loving, then detachment is a distortion of the real attitude of healthy detachment. If involvement means merely an expression of a super tense will that your infantile insistence on having what you want right away generates, then the healthy, provocative version of involvement is inverted. A third example of apparent opposites that make a comprehensive whole when not distorted. Let us take the inner attitudes of activity and passivity. On the dualistic level, these two seem to be mutually exclusive. The right inner interaction includes both these inner movements. For instance, meditation, as I've explained it here, must include both. You are active when you explore your inner levels of consciousness. You are active when you commit yourself and struggle to recognize and overcome resistance. You are active when you question yourself further to let the previously unadmitted destructive side express itself. You are active when you have a dialogue and re-educate the infantile, ignorant aspects of yourself. You are active when you use your ego consciousness to enlist the help of the spiritual consciousness. You are active when you create a new concept of life experience, as opposed to an old limiting one. When the ego deals with both other universes to establish a connection, you are active. But you must also learn to wait passively for the unfoldment and expression of both these other levels. Then the right blend of activity and passivity prevails in the psyche. The universal powers cannot come to fruition in a human being unless both the active and the passive movements are present. And I think, in the receptive place or the passive, like it is, like you said, we activate these powers and then we have to like open and wait, holding the light, but trusting in a larger movement that we can't make happen from our own small personal will. And so we just are opening and trusting that Holy Spirit will answer in its own divine timing and its own great wisdom. It knows better than we what we need. And if we keep struggling and trying to make it happen, we never get to that moment where we can receive it. Right? It never can come into us. So these are very important concepts to understand, to use, and to observe within yourself. Find where they are distorted and where they are functioning well. When the three-way interaction within yourself takes place, there is always a harmonious blend between desire and desirelessness, between involvement and attachment, between activity and passivity. When this balance becomes a steady state, the destructive infant grows up. It is not killed or annihilated. It is not exorcised. Its frozen powers resolve themselves into live energy, which you will actually feel, my friends, as a new living force. This infant must not be slain. It must be instructed to that salvation that can come to it, liberating it, bringing it to growth. If you work towards this goal, you will steadily move closer to unifying the ego level and the universal self. This is powerful material. Be blessed, be in peace, be God. Okay. Any last comments?
Beautiful
would-
stuff. Thank you.
I would like to say
Yeah,
that,
thank you.
that after listening to the initial delivery, Eva's initial delivery, I have a greater appreciation for the amount of work that John and Judith Saley have done
Yeah.
to edit these lectures into a more understandable presentation.
Yeah.
They must have listened to the tapes 1,000 times before they finished one lecture.
Well, I think there was a step in between that. So Eva gave the lectures, then she would go and transcribe them. And so
Eva would
there's
transcribe
the
them?
body of the original lectures. And then I think that John Saley and, they edited from her original written lectures, not from the original audio. But you're right, there's a vast difference in the original transmission of the audio. And then my understanding is that Eva herself would take that and go deeper and have the guide, like write out, but her syntax was still German. And so it was difficult to follow. Some people prefer the original lectures, but then John and Judith, Saley went in and came and did this other thing.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. And I would, are you buying these lectures? I think they're for sale on I've listened to a few. I've not ever gotten through to listen to all of them. So, but it's great that you're doing some of that, and in some time, it's good, I think, to just hear her voice and hear the original, delivery as she gave it. So.
And it's easy to understand how maybe a lot of people in the audience could have felt like they were being admonished. She did speak in a tone that was a bit admonishing, I would say, more than just a bit admonishing.
Yeah,
especially when someone asked a question.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of like there's something, sort of a German about her. Like her cultural delivery, right?
Oh my God.
Even a Nazi in there or something.
Oh man, for sure.
But at the time, I think the other reality is like she was talking to people that were deeply in their mask.
Yeah.
And believed that they were, okay, right? So it was kind of like almost like the guide had to break through a certain level of, social mask and unconsciousness with this material earlier on, the kind of, wake up, you've got stuff in you, and so I don't know. I also, just struggled with the energies of that, like I said, and so it was a blessing when I heard them read with a much more loving and softer tone. And maybe, Eva herself, like it was part of something that was not in her to receive the self-love, and transmit it in the same way. Her death and the the process that, you know, suggests that there was some part of her own transformation, right, that, you know, was still in process, and you know, so it's part of why I think we don't, you know, like put her up on a pedestal. She was very human in many ways, and you know, through the experiences that people had directly with her, you know, and through going, you know, on this journey with her, you know, the whole, even the pathwork, like in the early days, you know, like there was a kind of cult quality, and the early people really did believe, sort of, you know, it reminds me of sort of the early days of Christianity, you know, that the kingdom of God was right around the corner. And you know, like they had to work really hard and, you know, bring this community, and you know, it was like a little bit fanatical compared to what we have today, right? You know, and so you know, it's also, I think, how Eva received, you know, this guidance too, you know, and her own maybe harshness with herself in her own spiritual journey. But as you read this lecture, and we got into sort of the middle of it, you could see very clearly, time and time again, the guide says it doesn't help to moralize against yourself. It doesn't, you know, you have to, you know, hold yourself with love and respect and, yes, truth, but, you know, to be judgmental and negative against yourself is not the way forward either. So it's an interesting duality that I think is definitely throughout, you know, Eva and the lectures, and as part of my struggle, you know, but it was when I could hear the lectures without that kind of critic in myself.
Well, there's also an enormous amount of distraction going on in the background. It's like they were in New York City in an open space, and there's sirens and horns and everything going on in the background. It's like, oh my God, you have to wonder how she kept her concentration.
Right. Amazing. Yeah. And you know, some
Darlene,
of the,
I had a question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's all right.
I had a question about, you said the cult-like quality, and saying that there's the feeling or the thought that God was like right around the corner. Did that have anything to do with higher use of substances back then, like LSD and mushrooms and all that kind of stuff? Did that attract a certain type of crowd that had some of those more quicker experiences that were craving?
You know, for the most part, I don't think there was a lot of that in the Pathwork. You know, some people that, you know, like had done some of that exploration before they came to the Pathwork. But there were also a lot of like little Jewish, you know, like gathering around, or a lot of different kinds of people. But I think like what I'm referring to, and Keith talks about this too, you know, and Susan, you know, like when they got to Phoenicia, or when they, you know, they would do, you know, process groups, you know, in the whole community. And, you know, there was a big deal of confronting the lower self. And it was kind of like back in those days too, it was like in the culture, there was more sort of, what was that? You know, kind of Fritz Perls, and, you know, there was this kind of, you know, you're in the hot seat and people were giving you feedback, and sort of confrontation sorts of therapeutic processes that were happening. So I think there was, you know, some of that in the culture, you know, going on. But I think it was mostly, you know, just the awakening, the energy, the influx of energy that the guide said, and this deep material, and people were really, you know, yes, you know, this is an answer, you know, and they could feel it, and you know, and then trying to live what the guide was, you know, speaking, and bring it into, you know, reality. There was just, you know, during that time, it was like also the influx of the 60s and 70s. There, you know, there were drugs, but there was also, you know, meditation and Eastern philosophy and all kinds of things coming into the.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know that it's specifically, or, you know, any kind of excess in the drugs. I never heard any stories about that, you know.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But yeah.
Thank you for your time, Darlene.
Thank you, Darlene.
Yeah, thank you, Darlene.
You're welcome.
See
Have a
you
good night,
next
everyone.
time.
Good night.